Across the Middle East, a nightmare becomes reality. Israel, facing what it calls an existential threat, takes the most drastic step imaginable. It launches nuclear strikes against Iran. In moments, firestorms engulf Iranian cities. Sirens scream across the region. Oil markets collapse. Global leaders rush into emergency meetings. And the world confronts the terrifying prospect of a nuclear war spreading beyond the Middle East. But what would truly happen if Israel unleashed its nuclear arsenal on Iran? Tonight, we break down the consequences: military, diplomatic, economic, and human. Before we continue, if you want to understand world events beyond the headlines, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us deliver in-depth geopolitical analysis without sensationalism, but with clarity and insight. This video is for educational and analytical purposes only. It does not predict or promote violence, nor does it glorify nuclear war. Now let's begin. Why Israel versus Iran matters. To understand the apocalyptic scenario of an Israeli nuclear strike against Iran, we must first understand the world as it stands today. The Middle East, long called the world's most volatile region, sits at the crossroads of religion, history, and energy politics. Two countries in particular, Israel and Iran, represent opposite poles in this geopolitical struggle. Israel is the region's most advanced military power. Backed by Washington, equipped with cutting-edge American technology, and supported by its own world-class intelligence network, Israel has long held a strategic edge over its neighbors. But Israel also faces what it perceives as an existential threat: the possibility of a nuclear-armed Iran. Iran, meanwhile, is the Middle East's revolutionary powerhouse. With a population of nearly 90 million, vast oil and gas reserves, and influence stretching from Lebanon to Yemen, Tehran is not just a country, it is a regional force. Through groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and Shia militias in Iraq, Iran has built what it calls the axis of resistance. At the heart of this conflict lies the nuclear issue. For decades, Israel has vowed it will never allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons. Israeli leaders, from Menachem Begin in the 1980s to Benjamin Netanyahu in the 2010s, have made this a red line. The fear is simple. If Iran acquires a nuclear weapon, it could threaten Israel's very survival. Israel itself, while never officially admitting it, is believed to possess between 80 and 100 nuclear warheads. Some reports suggest these weapons can be delivered via ballistic missiles, submarines, and advanced fighter jets. This quiet arsenal, often referred to as Israel's nuclear ambiguity, has acted as a deterrent for decades. Iran, on the other hand, insists its nuclear program is peaceful. Yet international intelligence agencies, from the IAEA to the CIA, have long warned of Tehran's potential to enrich uranium to weapons-grade levels. Sanctions, sabotage, and cyber attacks have slowed Iran's progress, but they have not eliminated the knowledge, nor the ambition. In the shadow of these rivalries stands the United States. For Washington, Israel is a close ally, Iran a longtime adversary. U.S. forces are stationed across the Middle East, in Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq, making America a guaranteed participant in any major regional conflict. But the stakes go far beyond the region. Nearly 20% of the world's oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow choke point on Iran's southern coast. Any disruption there could send shockwaves through the global economy. Add to this the fact that Russia, China, and Europe all have deep interests in the Middle East, and the picture becomes clear. A nuclear war between Israel and Iran would not remain confined to the Middle East. It would shake the entire world. This is the stage. Two nations with clashing ideologies, one holding a covert nuclear arsenal, the other accused of chasing one, and a fragile international system balancing between deterrence and disaster. Now, imagine the unthinkable. Israel decides its survival is at stake and reaches for its most powerful weapon. The strike, how Israel's nuclear attack could unfold. Nuclear wars don't begin with warning shots. They begin with sudden, overwhelming force. If Israel were to launch a nuclear strike against Iran, military analysts suggest it would not be a symbolic gesture. It would be designed to cripple Iran's nuclear program, destroy command centers, and decapitate leadership structures in one decisive blow. The likely targets? Natanz, Fordo, and Arak, Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities. Isfahan and Bushehr sites tied to uranium conversion and nuclear power. Tehran, the political heart, where leadership could be decapitated. Revolutionary Guard bases, particularly missile sites threatening Israel. Israel possesses 3 main delivery systems. Jericho ballistic missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads across 1,500 to 5,000 kilometers. These could strike Iranian cities within minutes. Submarine-launched cruise missiles providing second strike capability, even if Israel itself were hit. Air-delivered weapons carried by F-15 and F-35 jets, giving Israel precision strike options. A nuclear strike would almost certainly begin with high-altitude detonations to generate electromagnetic pulses, EMPs, crippling Iran's power grids, communications, and radar. Within seconds, Iranian cities could be plunged into darkness. Then would come the direct strike's low-yield tactical warheads targeting hardened facilities. Natanz and Fordo are buried deep underground, but nuclear weapons could vaporize even fortified bunkers. The goal: eliminate Iran's nuclear capabilities in one strike. But nuclear weapons are not precise. Even a small detonation could kill tens of thousands in minutes. Fallout would spread across borders into Iraq, Pakistan, even parts of the Gulf. The most terrifying scenario is escalation. If Israel struck not only military sites but also Tehran, millions could die instantly. Such an act would not just cripple Iran. It would guarantee a global crisis without precedent in the 21st century. Israel would justify its actions as existential self-defense. But the world would see something else: the first use of nuclear weapons in war since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The psychological shock alone would be enormous. Markets would collapse. Governments would convene emergency sessions. Militaries worldwide would go on high alert. The world would enter a new, uncertain era, the age of nuclear war returning from history's shadows. But what happens next depends on one question: how does Iran respond? Section: Immediate Iranian response. Iran, struck by nuclear fire, would face devastation on an unimaginable scale. But it would not surrender quietly. The Revolutionary Guard, even if command structures were damaged, would unleash its arsenal. Iran possesses thousands of ballistic missiles, some capable of reaching Tel Aviv, Haifa, and even parts of Europe. Tehran could order Hezbollah in Lebanon to launch massive rocket barrages into northern Israel. The Houthis in Yemen could target Red Sea shipping. Militias in Iraq and Syria could strike U.S. bases. Iran also has the ability to target the Strait of Hormuz. By mining the waters or using anti-ship missiles, it could choke one of the world's most important energy lifelines. Even if much of Iran's leadership were destroyed, the country's vast network of proxy forces ensures that retaliation would not depend on a single command center. The war would spread across the Middle East, a storm of missiles, drones, and attacks on U.S. and Israeli assets. The risk of escalation into global war would now be real, because once missiles begin flying, other powers will not stay silent. Section: Global Powers. Step in. The United States would have no choice but to act. As Israel's closest ally, Washington would face immediate pressure to defend it against Iranian retaliation. U.S. bases in Bahrain, Qatar, and Iraq would likely be targeted within hours of Israel's strike. American casualties would pull Washington directly into the conflict. Carrier strike groups would move into the Persian Gulf and eastern Mediterranean. Missile defense systems, THAAD, Aegis, and Patriot would attempt to shield Israel and Gulf allies from Iranian barrages. Europe would be divided. Nations like the UK, Germany, and Poland would side firmly with Israel. Others, like France or Hungary, might call for restraint, fearing nuclear escalation. Russia, meanwhile, would see opportunity. Moscow could use the chaos to expand influence in Syria and weaken Western unity. It might provide covert aid to Iran, framing itself as the defender of sovereignty against Israeli aggression. China, heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil, would face a dilemma. Publicly, it would condemn nuclear use. Privately, it might deepen ties with Iran to secure discounted energy supplies. At the United Nations, paralysis would reign. The U.S. and its allies would block condemnations of Israel. Russia and China would veto any resolutions against Iran. The Security Council would be deadlocked, unable to stop the war. The most dangerous flashpoint? Direct clashes between U.S. and Iranian forces. If American ships or bases were hit, Washington could retaliate not only with conventional strikes, but potentially with its own nuclear threats. For the first time in generations, the world would face the real possibility of nuclear war between superpowers. Section: Economic fallout and oil shock. Wars in the Middle East are never confined to the battlefield. They spill into global markets. The moment Israel launched nuclear strikes, oil prices would skyrocket. If Iran retaliated by threatening the Strait of Hormuz, prices could surge past $200 per barrel. Inflation would spiral. Stock markets would collapse. Shipping routes in the Red Sea, Gulf of Oman, and Arabian Sea would be thrown into chaos. Insurance costs would skyrocket. Trade could grind to a halt. For ordinary people, the effects would be immediate. Gasoline prices would double, food costs would rise. Developing countries, already strained by debt and inflation, could face economic collapse. The 1973 oil crisis lasted months. A nuclear war in the Middle East could last years. Section: Risk of global nuclear escalation. World War III? Here lies the darkest possibility: the spiral into global nuclear war. Once one nation uses nuclear weapons, the taboo is broken. Other nuclear powers, the U.S., Russia, China, India, Pakistan, might reconsider their thresholds for use. If Israel's strike on Iran were followed by Iranian retaliation against U.S. forces, Washington could threaten nuclear retaliation of its own. Russia, seeking advantage, might posture its own arsenal. China, fearing U.S. dominance, could escalate in Asia. The danger of miscalculation would skyrocket. Submarines prowling oceans, missiles on hair-trigger alert, bombers circling skies. The risk of accidental war would be greater than at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Analysts warn that once nuclear weapons are used, it is nearly impossible to contain escalation. Leaders face pressure not to appear weak. Militaries, once activated, demand action. Nationalism surges, and each side convinces itself it must strike before being struck. The result could be global catastrophe, with cities from Tel Aviv to Tehran, Moscow to Washington, at risk of annihilation. Section: Endgame scenarios and long-term consequences. How could this nightmare end? Best case: international mediation halts the war before further nuclear use. Ceasefires are imposed, perhaps brokered by Turkey, India, or even the UNN. The world recoils but avoids total collapse. Middle case: a prolonged regional war, with Israel and Iran locked in a deadly struggle. Proxies fighting across the Middle East and the US, dragged deeper into conflict. Worst case: uncontrollable escalation, leading to multi-theater nuclear war, a third world war with consequences humanity may not survive. But even if escalation is avoided, the damage is done. The nuclear taboo is shattered. Trust in international institutions collapses. Oil markets are permanently reshaped. The Middle East, already unstable, becomes a radioactive scar, and global geopolitics enters a darker, more dangerous age. If Israel ever attacked Iran with nuclear weapons, the consequences would not be confined to the Middle East. They would ripple across the entire world, militarily, economically, diplomatically, and morally. This is why understanding geopolitics is so important. The decisions of nations in moments of crisis can shape the destiny of billions. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to like this video, comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe for more deep dives into global conflicts and their consequences. Together, let's stay informed, because knowledge is power.